Working the night shift always sounds easier than it actually is, especially when you're alone in a building that's completely empty for hours. People assume it's just quiet and boring, but after doing it for a while, you start noticing things that don't feel right, even if you can't explain why. I was working security at a small office building on the edge of the city. It wasn't huge, just a few floors, and after about 9 p.m., everyone would leave and it would be completely empty. My job was simple. Check doors, walk the floors, and watch the cameras. For the first few weeks, nothing unusual ever happened. Everything felt routine. Until one night. It was around 2 a.m. when I started my usual round on the second floor. I had already checked every door earlier that night, so I knew everything should have been locked. But when I turned the corner into one of the hallways, I noticed something immediately. One of the office doors was open, not wide open, just slightly, but enough to catch my attention. I stopped and stared at it for a second, trying to remember if I had missed it earlier. I was pretty sure I hadn't, but I walked over anyway and pushed it open. The room was completely empty, nothing out of place. No sign that anyone had been there. I stood there for a few seconds listening, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just silence. So I closed the door again and continued my round, telling myself it was probably nothing. About 10 minutes later, I heard something. A noise from that same direction. It wasn't loud, just a soft sound, like something shifting. I stopped walking and listened carefully. It happened again. This time I was sure of it. I went back to the door and opened it quickly. Still nothing. At that point, I started feeling uneasy, but I tried to stay calm and told myself it was just the building making noise. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't in the room. It was behind me, in the hallway. I turned around instantly. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Completely empty. That's when I decided to go back to the security desk and check the cameras. I sat down and rewound the footage from a few minutes earlier. At first, everything looked normal. Then I saw it. The door. The one I had just checked. Slowly opening on its own. Not quickly. Not like it was pushed. Just slowly. Like something was pulling it from the inside. Then something stepped out. At first I thought it was just a shadow, but then it moved, and I realized it wasn't a shadow. It had the shape of a person. But there were no details, no face, no clear body, just a shape that didn't look right. And then it stopped. Right in the hallway, and slowly it turned toward the camera, toward me, even though I wasn't there. It felt like it was looking directly at me through the screen. I froze. I didn't move. I just stared at the monitor. Then suddenly, the screen flickered. Just for a second. And when it came back, the hallway was empty again. Nothing there, no door open, nothing. I sat there for a long time trying to process what I just saw. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be some kind of glitch. It didn't make sense otherwise. But then something happened that I couldn't explain. I heard footsteps, not from the speakers, from the hallway, right outside the security room, slow, dragging, exactly like what I saw on the camera. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps got closer, and then they stopped. Right outside the door. I didn't move, I didn't speak, I just sat there staring at the door, waiting. Then, slowly, the door handle moved, just slightly, like something was trying to open it. I stood up immediately and backed away. The handle stopped. And then, nothing. No sound. No movement. I stayed there for what felt like forever before finally forcing myself to open the door. The hallway was empty, completely empty, but the feeling didn't go away. It felt like something had been there and had just left. After that night, I never felt alone in that building again. The second story was told to me by someone I met online after I shared what happened during my night shift. At the time, I was still trying to convince myself that what I saw on the cameras could be explained somehow, maybe as a glitch or just my imagination after being alone for too long. But when he started describing what happened to him, I realized it wasn't something random. He worked the night shift at a small convenience store located in a quiet part of town where almost nothing happened after midnight. Most nights were completely empty, and he would spend hours alone behind the counter with nothing but the sound of refrigerators humming and the occasional car passing by outside. He told me that one night, around 3:30 in the morning, something happened that completely changed the way he saw that job. He was standing behind the counter scrolling through his phone when the automatic door at the front of the store suddenly opened. At first, he didn't think anything of it because sometimes the sensor would react to passing headlights or movement outside. But when he looked up, he immediately noticed something strange. There was no one there. The door had opened fully, just like it would for a customer, but the entrance was completely empty. He waited a few seconds, expecting someone to walk in, but no one did, and eventually the door closed on its own. He told me he just shook it off and went back to what he was doing, assuming it was just a glitch, but a few minutes later it happened again. This time, the door didn't just open briefly. It opened and stayed open longer, as if something had triggered it and was still standing there, even though there was nothing visible. That's when he started feeling uncomfortable. He walked around the counter and went toward the entrance to check outside. But when he stepped out and looked around, the street was completely empty. There were no cars, no people, and no movement at all that could explain why the door had opened. He went back inside, but the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it got worse. A few minutes later, while he was standing behind the counter again, he heard something coming from the back of the store. It was a faint sound at first, but it was distinct enough that he immediately noticed it. It sounded like footsteps. Not fast or heavy, but slow and uneven, like someone dragging their feet slightly across the floor. He told me he stood still for a moment, listening carefully, trying to figure out if it could have been something falling, or maybe an animal that got inside, but the sound came again, and this time it was clearer. There was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, was moving in the store. He grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and slowly walked toward the back, checking each aisle one by one. As he moved through the store, everything looked completely normal. The shelves were stocked. Nothing was out of place, and there was no sign of anyone being there. But the deeper he went, the more it felt like he wasn't alone. When he reached the last aisle and found nothing, he started to feel a sense of relief, thinking maybe he had just imagined it. But as he turned around to head back toward the counter, he heard the sound again. This time it wasn't coming from the back of the store. It was behind him, much closer than before. He turned around immediately, shining the flashlight across the aisle, but there was nothing there. The space behind him was empty, and there was no movement anywhere in sight. At that point, he said his heart was racing, and he started walking back toward the counter faster, trying to stay calm but clearly shaken by what was happening. When he got back to the front of the store, he decided to check the security cameras to see if they had captured anything. He sat down and started looking through the live feed, focusing on the camera pointed at the entrance. That's when he saw something that made everything worse. On the screen, the front door was open again. But this time, there was something standing just inside the doorway. It wasn't outside foot, it was already inside the store. He told me it looked like a person at first glance, but the longer he looked at it, the more he realized that something about it wasn't right. The shape was there, but there were no clear details, almost like it was incomplete. He looked up from the monitor toward the actual entrance. There was nothing there. Then he looked back at the screen. The figure was still there, standing perfectly still, facing the camera. He said that's when he completely froze, because it didn't make any sense. If something was standing there, he should have been able to see it in real life, not just on the screen. But the worst part was what happened next. The figure on the camera started to move. Not in a normal way. It didn't take steps or walk forward. Instead, it seemed to glide across the floor, moving slowly toward the counter where he was sitting. He said he couldn't move at all. He just sat there, staring at the monitor, watching it get closer and closer. When it reached the edge of the camera's view, it suddenly disappeared. He immediately looked up from the screen toward the store. Everything was empty. There was nothing there. But then he heard something that made him panic. Breathing, not his own. Not coming from a distance, but right next to him. Close enough that he could feel it. He said he didn't turn around. He couldn't. He just sat there completely frozen, trying to process what was happening. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. The store went completely silent again. He stayed there for the rest of his shift without moving much, and the moment his shift ended, he left and never came back. The next day, he quit the job, and before we stopped talking, he told me one last detail that made everything feel even more connected to what I experienced. He said that right before the camera feed cut out for a few seconds, the figure at the entrance slowly turned its head and smiled. The third story is the one that made everything feel real. And it's the reason I stopped working night shifts completely. After hearing what happened to the other guy at the store, I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. That maybe we were both just imagining things after spending too much time alone at night. But deep down, I knew there was something more to it. A few nights later, I went back to work like usual. I followed the same routine, checked the same doors, walked the same hallways, and tried to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. Everything seemed normal at first, until it wasn't. It was around 2:40 in the morning when I walked into the same hallway where I had seen that door open before. I wasn't even thinking about it at the time, but as soon as I turned the corner, I felt it. That same feeling, like something was wrong. I looked down the hallway and immediately I saw it. The door, the same office door, wide open. Not slightly this time, completely open, like someone had just walked through it. I stopped walking and just stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to remember if I'd checked it earlier. I knew I had. I always checked every door. Slowly, I started walking toward it, feeling my chest tighten with every step. When I reached the doorway, I looked inside. The room was empty, but it didn't feel empty. The air inside felt heavier than the hallway, like the room itself was holding something that wasn't supposed to be there. I stepped inside anyway, and that's when I heard it, a sound from the hallway behind me. Footsteps, slow, uneven, dragging slightly across the floor, exactly like the sound the other guy described in the store. My body froze for a second, but I forced myself to turn around. The hallway was empty. No one there, no movement, nothing. I told myself it was nothing, just like before, and stepped back into the hallway, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. As I stood there, I noticed something at the far end of the corridor. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the darkness. But then I realized there was something there. A figure, standing completely still at the end of the hallway, too far to see clearly, but definitely there. I called out, asking if someone was in the building, but there was no response. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Then, slowly, it started moving toward me, not walking. Not like a normal person. Its movement was wrong. It didn't look like its feet were touching the ground. It looked like it was sliding forward. I took a step back without even thinking, and my heart started racing. The closer it got, the more I realized something about it didn't make sense. It had the shape of a person, but there were no details, no face, no features, just a form that didn't belong. And then I noticed something that made it worse. It was smiling, or at least it looked like it was. The shape of its face was stretched in a way that didn't look natural, like it was trying to imitate a smile without understanding how it should actually look. At that point, I turned and ran. I didn't think about anything else. I just ran down the hallway as fast as I could, heading toward the stairs. As I ran, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. But they didn't sound like normal footsteps. They matched my speed perfectly, every step I took. It took one, too. Closer. Closer. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close it was. I just kept running until I reached the main floor and headed for the exit. When I pushed the front door open and stepped outside, everything went silent instantly. No footsteps, no sound. Nothing. It was like whatever was behind me couldn't follow me outside. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath, and slowly turned around. The building was completely dark. No lights, no movement, nothing. It looked normal again, like nothing had happened. I went home that night and didn't sleep at all. The next day I quit the job. I didn't go back. I didn't want anything to do with that place again. For a while, I tried to move on and forget about it, but something changed after that night. At first, it was small things. I would feel like someone was watching me when I was alone. I would hear faint sounds at night that I couldn't explain. Footsteps, soft, uneven, just like the ones I heard in the building. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was just paranoid after everything that happened. But then one night, something happened that proved it wasn't. I was sitting alone in my apartment sometime around 3 a.m. when I heard it again. Footsteps, not outside, not in another room, right behind me, close enough that I could feel it. My entire body froze. Slowly, I turned my head. There was nothing there. The room was empty, but the feeling didn't go away. It felt like something was still standing there, watching, waiting. And then I heard it, breathing, right next to my ear, and a voice, quiet, low, the same tone I'd heard before. "You've been here before." I didn't move. I didn't turn around. I didn't even breathe. Because in that moment, I understood something I wish I never had. It was never about the building. It was never about the store. It wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to me. And whatever I saw that night didn't stay there. It followed. And it's still here. Because even now, as I'm telling this, I can hear something moving behind me. Slow, uneven, getting closer. And this time, I don't think it's going to stop.